All right, welcome to Friday's lesson, TGIF. So we're talking today about quadratic formula. So we're still talking about solutions. What are the other names for those? We got roots, zeros, x-intercepts. Okay, so basically quadratic formula is another method in addition to like factoring and a couple other things, graphing, to actually solve for x. So finding out what x is equal to. All right, so let's get started. First with the warm-up. Here we have a quadratic equation in factored form, right? We got two parentheses, so that tells me automatically factored form. You could put this in your calculator and you could get values. You can also plug in. If x is 0, then I just replace both of these x's with zeros. So 0 minus 2 is negative 2, and 0 minus 4 is negative 4. So negative 2 times negative 4 is a positive 8. So that would be my y value. All right, so I can do that for all of them. So let's do that for 1. So I got 1 here. I'm just replacing. Those x's should be disappeared when I put the 1 over them. So 1 minus 2 is negative 1. And 1 minus 4 is negative 3. So negative 1 times negative 3 is a positive 3. All right, let's just use all the colors we got here. So 2, if I replace the x's with 2's, 2 minus 2 is 0, and 2 minus 4 is negative 2, right? So 0 times anything is 0, all right? And remember, whenever your y value is 0, this is one of my roots, solutions, right? So here I would have x equals 2. That's one of my solutions when the y value is 0. Okay, so if I were to graph this and at x equals 2, right, that would be one of my values that the quadratic, that the parabola would go through. All right, let's keep going. Let's do black. All right, so if I replace x with 3, 3 and 3, 3 minus 2 is 1, 3 minus 4 is negative 1. So 1 times negative 1 is negative 1. All right. And now let's try 4. 4 minus 2 and 4 minus 4. Okay, 4 minus 2 is 2, and 4 minus 4 is 0. All right, 2 times 0. Oh, again, that is 0. This y value is 0, right? So this would be my other root. So at 4, right? And I know that I don't see a negative in front of those parentheses. So my quadratic would look something like that, right? It would go through the roots at positive 2 and at positive 4. Okay. And let's do the last one. I'm out of color, so I need to go back to red. All right, so 5 and 5. 5 minus 2 is 3, and 5 minus 4 is 1. So 3 times 1 is a positive 3. Oh, and I see that here, right? And that's common with quadratics, where I see pairs that repeats. Okay. And that would mean that this right here would be the vertex. Vertex. So that means the vertex is at 3, negative 1, right? That would be here, 3, negative 1. And my axis of symmetry would be x equals 3, whatever that x value is there. Right. Okay, fun facts. All right, so what is the approximate value of the function They're saying like, what's the approximate value of y when x is 4.5? So right in the middle here. So if I wanted 4.5. So it would be something in the middle, right, of the, let's see. Wait, where am I here? So here's 4. Here's where x is 4, and here's about where x would be 5, right? Okay, 5 something, and this is 4 something. Okay, so at 4, the y value is 0, and at 5, the y value is 3. So if it was 4.5 somewhere in here, right, it would be between 0 and 3. So if you wanted to put 1.5, I would be fine with that. Remember, they're asking for an approximate, so about how much. Whereas if you put something like -1, that's definitely not going to be my y value at 4.5. So you could put, and I'll put like this wavy thing, about, 1.5, about in the middle. Maybe it's 2, maybe it's 1, right? But it's somewhere in the middle of the 0 and the 3. Okay. So now we are really getting into quadratic. This right here is my quadratic. I'm not spelling that right. Quadratic, because remember, all of these functions are quadratic functions. And this is the quadratic formula. All right, so instead of completing the square, instead of factoring, this formula goes straight into what these x's would equal, what those roots would be, right? Those roots, those solutions, x-intercepts, zeros, right? All of that. It just tells you in this formula what those would be when the y value, all right, is 0. Okay, so you can look at those two examples on 524, and they kind of go step by step with what they did in those two front examples. I'm just going to go over a couple of problems that you have on the worksheet under that. All right. And again, try to do them on your own, right? Until you get stuck or something like that. All right. So hopefully what you got from the beginning is that once you have your quadratic equation, right? Once you have this thing, the A, B, and C come from that standard way of writing it, ax squared plus bx plus c. So the b values here come from the middle term, right? Whatever is in front of the x. The a term comes from whatever is in front of the x squared, right? And in this case, that would be an invisible 1. And the c comes from the term all by itself here, right? This thing right here. So the c would be 5. So the c is that constant. All right, so let me erase this to make it a little bit neater. All right, so as soon as I look at this, right, we know that that's quadratic formula. All right, as soon as I look at this, you should be able to tell me that a equals 1 because I've got my invisible 1 in front of x squared. B equals -6. And C equals +5. All right, so always that way. A is always a coefficient to x squared, B is always a coefficient to x, and C is always the number by itself. After that, it's just substitution. So I go to my quadratic formula and I say x equals, and instead of -b, I'm going to put negative, and I'm going to replace the b value with -6. Okay, now plus or minus, you guys should know what that means. It means I'm going to do -6 plus whatever comes after it, and the same thing minus whatever comes after it. And, as I always do, I'm going to run out of room. So let's be prepared for that. All right. And so here I have b squared. So I'm going to put -6 squared minus 4a. So a is 1 times c. And c is 5. Okay. All right, divided by 2 times a, which again is 1. Okay, so now I'm going to just simplify that. So a -6 is a +6, plus or minus. And here I'm actually going to put all of this into my calculator. So I'm going to put the square root here. Oops, I wanted to do that in green. All right. So I'm going to put all of this in the square root, but I'm actually going to take my calculator, and I wish that I could show you the calculator on here, but you're going to have to trust me. And I am literally just putting in everything that's underlined in red. So literally I'm putting parentheses, -6, close my parentheses, squared, minus 4, open parentheses, I'm going to put 1 times 1, close, open another parentheses, 5, close. So I'm not putting the square root in here, I'm just putting the numbers in red. Okay, so when I press enter, I get 16. So here I'm going to have 16. Actually didn't need this to be as long as I made it. Divided by 2 times 1 is 2. Oh, okay. So 16, that's pretty easy to figure out the square root. So the square root of 16 is 4. So this is x equals 6 plus or minus, that's a plus, 4 equals 2. Oh my gosh, guys, I might actually not run out of room. All right, so remember that plus minus means 6 plus 4 and 6 minus 4. So here I'm going to write x equals 6 plus 4 divided by 2, and x equals 6 minus 4 divided by 2. So remember that plus minus means plus 4 and minus 4. All right, so now 6 plus 4 is 10 divided by 2. So that would give me a root of 5. All right, and 6 minus 4 is 2 divided by 2 is 1. So my two roots, right, if I were to draw this, are at 1 and 5. 1 and 5. So that would be where it crosses the x-axis. So it would be something like that, right? Nice. All right, so roots. Okay, so next one. All right, exactly the same thing here. So I look at this, and let me write my ax squared plus bx plus c, right, equals 0. So my a value is -3, right? That's always in front of x squared. B value is a +8. And my c value is a +1. And now I'm just going to plug that right in. X equals negative, and instead of b, I'm going to put in 8 plus or minus the square root of b squared, so that would be 8 squared, minus 4, and then a is -3, and c is a +1. Okay, all divided by 2 and a, again, is negative 3. All right, so all I've done here is I've assigned the A, the B, and the C based on my problem, the A, the B, and the C. And then I plugged in those values into my quadratic formula. Now, side note, you do not have to memorize the quadratic formula. This is given to you on a Regents exam. You can always Google it. You can memorize it. You never have to memorize it. On a test, it will be given to you, okay? All right, so same thing. X equals negative 8 plus or minus, and I'm going to do my square root, but I'm going to put all of this 8 squared minus 4 times negative 3 times 1 in my calculator. So just give me a minute to do that. So literally I'm going to put 8 squared minus 4 parentheses negative 3 parentheses 1. You can also put minus 4 times 3 times 1. And make sure you're putting the negative button, not the minus button for negative 3. All right, and I got 76 here. All right, let me actually make that in green. Okay, divided by, and 2 divided by negative 3 is negative 6. All right, now 76 is not a perfect square term, right? So what I'm going to do in order to add it to negative 8, right? Sometimes we keep it in the square root, and sometimes we change it to a decimal, right? So unless they tell you which one to do, like if they say find it to the nearest tenth, that means they want you to find the decimal. If they say keep it in simplest radical form, then keep it in simplest radical form. So I'm trying to see if this has a perfect square factor in it, and it does, so we could simplify it. All right, so let's see. So x equals negative 8 plus or minus, and let me just show you over here. If I take the square root of 76, that can be written as 4 times 19, the square root of 4 times 19. And I chose that because 4 is a perfect square term. So 4, square root of 4 is 2, and I leave the 19 inside because that's a prime number. So I could simplify this into 2 square root 19 divided by negative 6. So you could leave it like that. I do want to show you also how to do it with the decimal. So if you put the square root of 76, or you could put 2 square root 19, should give you the same decimal, I get about 8.72, right? So use your calculator, check my math with that, right? But I get, all right, negative 8 plus or minus about 8.72. Now I'm rounding here, divided by negative 6. All right, so with this one, I did run out of room. So make sure you take a picture, do what you got to do. I'm going to erase the top part and just rewrite this line here, right? I'm just going to rewrite this line at the top. Okay. So x equals negative 8. And actually, I'm just going to write this one, 8 point. All right, so remember, that would mean x equals negative 8 plus 8.72 divided by negative 6. And x equals negative 8 minus 8.72 divided by negative 6. All right, so now it's just calculator skills. And remember, the fraction is the same as a grouping symbol. I want to do what's all in the numerator before I divide by anything. All right, so I'm using my calculator again. I encourage you guys to check my work. Negative 8 plus 8.72 equals 0.72. So x equals 0.72 divided by negative 6. And make sure you're dividing by that negative, not minus 6, okay? X equals negative 0.12. So one of my roots is at negative 0.12. And the other one, so x equals, I'm going to put negative 8 minus 8.72. And I get negative 16.72. Divided by negative 6. Divide by negative 6. And again, I get about, I'm rounding this here, I get about 2.79, right? And again, I'm rounding that. If you do it in your calculator, you should get like 2.7866666666, that kind of thing. So these are my two roots. Okay, so here's a Regents Review question, and I am probably going to go over 25 minutes, so feel free to flip through to the end if you think you got it, or check and just see the answer, or go through the whole thing with me, okay? All right, so Adam pulled the plug in the bathroom, and it started to drain. So imagine that in your brain, right? You've got a tub filled with water, right? And then you pull the plug, and as soon as you pull the plug, the time starts ticking. So when t equals 0, at 0 seconds, right as soon as your hand is on the plug, right, at 0 seconds, the tub is still filled with all of the water, okay? And then after 1 second, a little bit less, 2 seconds, a little bit less water, 3 seconds, until you have no water, right? So there's a certain time where all the water has drained. So it's really important. Sometimes you might even want to just draw a picture of a bathtub. Here's the bathtub. And then here's the water, right? And then after a certain amount of time, right, you'll have less and less water until you have no water, right? All the water's gone. So they give you a equation, and if you notice, the squared there, the negative 5t squared, lets you know that this is a quadratic function. Now, L represents the number of liters of water, so maybe I should have underlined that in blue, since this is the liters of water in that bathtub at any given time. And T represents the amount of time in minutes since that plug was pulled. All right, so how many liters, I see liters, so I'm going to go back to blue. How many liters of water were in the bathtub when Adam pulled the plug? So remember, as soon as you pull the plug, that time was 0. So if the t is 0, at 0 seconds, 0 squared is 0 times negative 5 is 0. This is 0. 0 times negative 8 is 0. So there's 120 liters of water at t equals 0, right? When Adam pulls the plug. Okay. All right, so that's my first question. All right, show your reasoning. Okay. All right. Then determine to the nearest tenth of a minute. Oh, so we know, remember in the last example, it was like, should we put it in square root form? Should we put it as a decimal? So you are doing as a decimal, right? The amount of time it takes for all of the bathtub to drain. So for this L, so for the L or the Y value to become a 0. And remember, whenever we solve for X, whenever we find the root, the Y value, and in this case, the L is in that Y place, becomes 0. All right. So when I've got no more liters of water, how much time do I have left? This is where I can use that quadratic formula. So A is -5. B is -8. And C is a positive 120. All right. So if I have my quadratic formula, I'm just going to write it here. B squared minus 4AC over 2A. And remember, you never have to memorize this, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace every B with -8. -8. Oops. It's hard to write small in this. All right, and here I've got -8 squared. Okay. For A, I'm going to replace that with -5. -5. And for C, I'm going to replace that with 120. Okay. And down here, A is going to be -5. Okay. All right. And so remember, I always just put the numbers in here in my calculator. So I don't put the square root yet, but I will. So I literally, if you could see me on my couch, I am going to put parentheses -8 squared minus 4 parentheses -5, and then again parentheses 120, and enter. And I get the number 2464, so 2,464. All right, so this gives me, so -8 gives me a +8, plus or minus the square root of 2,464. All over 2 times -5 is -10. Okay, so remember, this is two things. It is x equals 8 plus, and I'm actually going to put this in decimal form now. So I'm going to put square root in my calculator, 2464, enter. And I get about 49.6386, okay? And I want it to be to the nearest tenth, right? So I'm just going to put 49.6, okay, divided by -10. And x equals 8, minus 49.6 divided by -10. All right, so now I'm going to do +8, which gives me 57.6, and I'm going to divide that by -10. So this gives me x equals -5.76 something, so -5.8. That could never be it because I can't have a negative time. All right, I'm going to run out of time. It's kicking me off here. I only get 30 minutes. So do this. This will become your answer. You know what to do with questions or concerns. Talk later. Bye.